morning sun bathed Emma Sullivan's Los Angeles apartment in golden light, illuminating a space that felt warm but carried an invisible weight. In the kitchen, she maneuvered through her morning routine like a well-rehearsed performance, brewing coffee, reviewing architectural plans on her tablet, and preparing breakfast for her 5-year-old son, Ethan. The comforting scent of waffles mixed with the soft vanilla notes of her perfume, but beneath the surface, something restless stirred inside her. "Ethan, did you pack your backpack?" Emma called over her shoulder. A blur of movement signaled her son's entrance, still clad in his spacesuit pajamas, clutching a miniature model of the Apollo 11 rocket. "Boss, Mom, but Lucas said we're learning about the solar system today. Can I wear my astronaut shirt?" Emma smiled. "That one's in the wash, sweetheart. How about the blue one with the comet on it?" Ethan thought for a second before nodding. "Okay, but you have to cut my sandwich into a star shape." Their morning routine followed its usual rhythm, until Ethan suddenly asked the one question Emma dreaded the most. "Mom, why don't I have a dad?" The words hit like a sudden gust of wind, stealing Emma's breath. Her hands hesitated over the sandwich bag, her heart sinking. She took a deep breath, turning to kneel beside her son. "You know, sweetheart, every family is different," she said gently. "Some kids have a mom and a dad, some have 2 moms or 2 dads, and some, like us, have a mom who loves them more than anything in the world." Ethan nodded slowly, but she could see the curiosity lingering in his bright blue eyes. Before he could ask more, her phone buzzed. Grateful for the distraction, Emma reached for it. An email from work. As she scanned through the details, her breath caught. Ryan Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Developments, was listed as the keynote speaker, the man who had walked away 5 years ago. Emma looked over at Ethan, the child with the same piercing blue eyes as Ryan. The past she had fought so hard to bury was about to resurface. Emma set her phone down, but her heartbeat continued to race. Ryan Caldwell, the name she had spent 5 years trying to forget. This wasn't just any corporate meeting. This was the biggest real estate gala of the year, where the top firms would compete for the chance to design a landmark skyscraper in Los Angeles. Winning this contract could launch her career to new heights. But was it worth facing the man who had walked away when she needed him the most? She swallowed the lump in her throat, reminding herself, this is business, just business. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Emma stood before her closet, her fingers grazing over crisp blazers and elegant dresses. Her hands stopped at a sleek black gown, the same one she had worn on the last night she had seen Ryan. Memories flooded back. 5 years ago. Rain poured relentlessly. Emma stood under the awning of a coffee shop, gripping her umbrella, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Ryan, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan, back then just a young entrepreneur on the rise, had just secured his company's biggest expansion deal. His gray-blue eyes were sharp, but there was hesitation in them. "Emma, I can't," he said, his tone final. "The company is at a crucial stage. I can't have a family right now." His words sliced through her like a blade. "What, Ryan?" He shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "I'm sorry." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the rain. Present day. Emma tightened her grip on the dress. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be that heartbroken girl left behind in the rain. She was a successful architect, a strong mother. No matter what happened, she would face Ryan with her head held high. Emma stepped into the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons, where crystal chandeliers cast shimmering reflections across designer suits and elegant gowns. The room buzzed with conversations between some of the most powerful figures in real estate, all gathered for one purpose: to compete for the biggest contract of the year. She took a deep breath, keeping her expression composed even as her heart pounded. She couldn't let emotions get in the way. She was here for her career, not for anyone else. A voice echoed from the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caldwell Development's annual gala." The host paused before continuing. "And now, please give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, the CEO of Caldwell Developments, Mr. Ryan Caldwell." Emma's breath caught in her throat. The room applauded, but she couldn't move. Ryan walked onto the stage, tall, confident, commanding. His navy blue suit was impeccably tailored, his brown hair neatly styled, and his gray-blue eyes sharp. He looked just as he had years ago, only now even more powerful. As he began his speech, his deep, magnetic voice silenced the room. And then, for the briefest moment as his gaze swept across the audience, he saw her. Emma felt the moment like a shift in the air. His eyes locked onto hers, and in that instant, she saw recognition, shock, and something deeper. An emotion she couldn't quite name. It lasted only a second before he continued speaking, but she knew. Half an hour later, as the speech ended and the crowd dissolved into business discussions, Emma made her way toward the exit. But before she could leave, a deep, familiar voice stopped her. "Emma?" She turned, meeting his eyes for the first time in 5 years. They exchanged words, tense, polite, but then an accident. Her purse slipped, scattering papers onto the floor, and among them, a child's crayon drawing of a spaceship, labeled in messy handwriting, Ethan. Ryan picked it up. The moment he saw the name, everything changed. "Ethan?" His voice was raw. "Is this your son?" Emma's heart pounded. "He's 5, Ryan." Ryan exhaled sharply, his world tilting. "I need to meet him," he said, firm and resolute. Emma gripped her purse. "This won't be easy, Ryan," but deep down she knew this was only the beginning. Emma walked briskly out of the ballroom, but she knew she couldn't escape. Ryan was right behind her. "Emma, wait!" She stopped in the quiet hallway of the hotel, turning to face him. "What do you want, Ryan?" His gray-blue eyes were still filled with shock. "It's my son, isn't it?" Emma tightened her grip on her purse. She wanted to lie, to deny it, but it wouldn't matter anymore. She took a deep breath. "Yes, Ethan is your son." Ryan staggered back a step as if he'd been punched. He ran a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "Jesus, I have a son, and you never told me?" Emma folded her arms, her expression icy. "You don't get to say that, Ryan. You left. You said you couldn't have a family. I did what was best for my child." Ryan shook his head, his voice dropping lower, a storm brewing in his eyes. "But I had a right to know, Emma. Do you have any idea what I've missed?" Emma let out a bitter laugh. "What you've missed? You never planned to stay, Ryan. If I had told you, then what? Would you have dropped everything to be a father?" Ryan was silent. For the first time, he had no answer. Emma pressed on, her voice shaking with emotion. "You weren't there when I found out I was pregnant. You weren't there when I went to the hospital alone. When Ethan took his first breath, when he took his first steps, when he asked why he didn't have a dad." She met his gaze, her eyes burning. "You weren't there, Ryan, and I had to do it all by myself." Ryan clenched his fists, his face etched with regret. "Emma, I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't change the past." Her voice was cold. Ryan took a slow breath, then looked up at her. This time, there was no shock in his eyes, only determination. "I want to meet him." Emma shook her head. "It's not that simple, Ryan." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said, his voice firm. "I'm asking for a chance. A chance to do the right thing." Emma stared at him, old memories crashing over her. A part of her wanted to say no, but another part whispered that Ethan deserved to know the truth. She inhaled deeply. "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, the Science Museum." Ryan exhaled sharply, as if she had just given him the most valuable chance of his life. "Thank you, Emma." She didn't reply. She just turned and walked away, her heart more conflicted than ever. Emma sat on a bench outside the Science Museum, her eyes fixed on her watch. 2:55 p.m. She glanced at Ethan, who was mesmerized by the solar system model in the window. He was excited for their museum visit, but what he didn't know was that today's trip came with a much bigger surprise. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Was she making a mistake? Before she could dwell on it further, a tall figure stepped into view. Ryan Caldwell. He approached with measured steps, his usual confidence slightly tempered by tension. Dressed in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his gray bull eyes were locked onto them. Emma stood up, keeping her tone even. "You're on time." Ryan nodded, but his focus was on the little boy standing beside her. Ethan looked up, curiously assessing the unfamiliar man. "Then this is Ryan," Emma said carefully. "He's a friend of mine who really wanted to meet you." Ryan knelt to Ethan's level. "Hey, Ethan." Ethan tilted his head, his bright eyes scanning Ryan as if evaluating him. "Do you like space?" Ryan chuckled, realizing this was a test. "I do. When I was little, I wanted to be an astronaut." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Really?" Ryan nodded, "But instead I build skyscrapers that reach for the sky." Ethan considered this for a moment before grinning. "Then can you help me build a rocket model?" Ryan shot Emma a glance, almost as if seeking permission. She gave a small nod. "I'd love to," Ryan said. "But only if you teach me all the rocket parts." They stepped inside, with Ethan leading the way, eagerly explaining everything about space exploration. Emma followed behind, watching closely. Ryan wasn't just nodding along. He was truly listening. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because he genuinely wanted to know his son. At the Apollo 11 exhibit, Ethan began constructing a miniature rocket model from the interactive Lego station. He was focused, but the structure wobbled unsteadily. Ryan watched for a moment before saying gently, "Try adding a support beam here." He pointed to a weak spot in the build. Ethan followed his suggestion, and the rocket stood perfectly upright. His eyes widened in amazement. "Mom, look, it worked!" Emma approached, smiling. "That's amazing, sweetheart." Ethan turned to Ryan, admiration shining in his face. "You're really smart," Ryan laughed, but before he could respond, Ethan hesitated. Can you come play with me again?" Emma's breath hitched. This was the moment she feared most, when Ethan started to attach. Ryan glanced at her before answering, his voice careful. "If your mom says it's okay, I'd love to." Ethan turned to Emma, his eyes full of hope. She hesitated, but then she reminded herself of the most important thing. "All right, Ethan." Ethan cheered, bouncing excitedly. Ryan let out a quiet breath of relief. Today was only a small step, but it was the first step of something much bigger. A week later, Ryan arrived at the Central Park to pick up Ethan, who was playing on the slides with his friends. Emma stood nearby, watching the two from a distance. The moment Ethan spotted Ryan, he ran over, beaming. "Mr. Ryan, where are we going today?" Ryan chuckled, crouching down to adjust the little astronaut cap on Ethan's head. "I was thinking, how about a space show at the planetarium?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "Really? I've never seen one in real life." Ryan stood up, his gaze flickering toward Emma as if checking for her approval. She gave him a small nod, allowing them more time together. The planetarium show took place in near darkness, the massive dome ceiling lighting up with millions of sparkling stars. Ethan sat between Ryan and Emma, his head tilted back, eyes wide with awe. "Mr. Ryan, how many rings does Saturn have?" he whispered. Ryan smiled. 7, and they're made of ice and cosmic dust." Ethan nodded, completely entranced by the universe above him. After the show, they went to a small diner for dinner. Ethan excitedly recounted everything he had learned, and Ryan listened attentively, occasionally asking questions to encourage him to talk more. Emma remained silent, simply watching. Something had changed. Ethan was no longer shy around Ryan. He had grown used to his presence, had begun to see him as a part of his world. When dinner ended, Ryan drove them home. Ethan sat in the back seat, clutching his favorite stuffed bear, his eyelids growing heavy with sleep. "Did you have fun today?" Ryan asked gently. Ethan nodded sleepily. "Yeah, today was really great." He yawned, hesitating for a long moment before murmuring, his voice barely above a whisper, "Thanks, Daddy." The word slipped out in a drowsy mumble, but it hit Ryan like an earthquake. Emma's fingers tightened on her seatbelt. Ryan, for a moment, forgot how to breathe. His grip on the steering wheel slackened, his entire world shifting in that instant. Daddy. Not Mr. Ryan, not a stranger, Daddy. He turned slightly, but Ethan had already leaned against the seat, eyes half closed, completely unaware of the life-altering weight of what he had just said. Ryan swallowed hard, his chest tightening with overwhelming emotion. He looked over at Emma, his eyes reflecting 1,000 things: shock, joy, and something dangerously close to tears. Emma didn't know what to say either. Ethan had called Ryan Daddy, not because anyone told him to, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. In that single moment, Ryan's entire world shifted. He wasn't just Mr. Ryan anymore. He was Dad. Emma sat at the dining table, staring intently at her laptop screen. Displayed on the monitor was an official job offer from Seattle Architectural Group, one of the most prestigious firms in the country. They wanted her to lead the design of a state-of-the-art medical research center. This was the opportunity she had worked her entire career for. But if she accepted, she would have to leave Los Angeles. Emma rubbed her temples, her mind in turmoil. In the living room, Ethan sat on the carpet, fully engrossed in building a spaceship with Ryan. The little boy giggled as Ryan fumbled, placing the wrong piece in the wrong spot. "That's not right, Daddy," Ethan laughed, patiently correcting him. Ryan sighed dramatically. "Are you sure you're only 5? Because I think you're way smarter than me." Ethan grinned proudly. "I'm going to be a space engine." Emma watched them, something tight forming in her chest. She couldn't leave, not now, not when Ethan and Ryan were finally building the bond they deserved. But if she turned down this job, would she be giving up her own future? Her phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was the hiring director from Seattle. "We'd love to have you on board, Emma," the polite voice said. "Could you give us your final decision by tomorrow?" Emma tightened her grip on the phone, her eyes unconsciously drifting toward Ryan and Ethan. Ethan threw his arms around Ryan as they completed the spaceship, his face beaming with joy. Ryan smiled, but when his gaze met Emma's, the smile faltered. He sensed something was wrong. Emma took a deep breath. She had made decisions alone for the past 5 years, but this time, maybe she shouldn't. Emma sat on a park bench, her mind in turmoil. Ethan was running around, playing with other kids, but all she could think about was Seattle. She had spent the entire night deliberating. This job was her dream, but if she accepted it, she'd be taking Ethan away from Ryan. Was that fair? Footsteps behind her pulled her out of her thoughts. Ryan sat down beside her, silent for a moment before speaking. "I know something's wrong. Talk to me." Emma clenched her hands. "They gave me until today to decide. If I accept, Ethan and I will be moving to Seattle." Ryan went completely still. He didn't get angry. He didn't lash out, but the weight of his silence was deafening. After a long moment, he took a slow breath and said something that shocked her to the core. "I'll move to Seattle." Emma's head snapped toward him. "What?" Ryan's voice remained steady. "My company already has plans to expand there. If you agree, I'll push the timeline up." Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Ryan, that's your entire career." "No." He shook his head, his eyes unwavering. "Ethan is what matters. You matter." Emma opened her mouth to argue, but Ryan gently took her hand. "I made a mistake once, Emma. I won't lose this family again." Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel alone. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, we'll do this. Together." In the distance, Ethan laughed as he swung higher and higher, unaware that, in this moment, his entire world had just changed. 2 months later, a moving truck pulled up in front of a cozy house in the Seattle suburbs. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of new beginnings. Ethan hopped out of the car, eyes wide as he took in the house. "Mom, is this our new home?" Emma smiled, ruffling his hair. "That's right, sweetheart. And guess what? Your dad is going to live here too." Ethan spun around, staring at Ryan with round, hopeful eyes. "Really?" Ryan knelt down, nodding. "Yeah, buddy. From now on, I'll always be here." For a moment, Ethan just stared. Then, without warning, he threw himself into Ryan's arms. Ryan held his son tightly, his heart overflowing. He had missed so much, but from this moment on, he wouldn't miss another second. Beside them, Emma quietly wiped away a tear of joy. That night, they had their first family dinner in their new home. Ethan sat between them, his excitement boundless as he mapped out plans for his room, where his space models would go, where the bookshelf for his mission control would be. Ryan and Emma shared a look, something unspoken passing between them. They had been through loss, through heartbreak, through years apart. But in the end, they had found their way back, a family,